Hey everybody, welcome back to Environmental Organic Chemistry, and we're continuing our discussion about sorption. In the last lecture, I talked about the Langmuir and Freundlich sorption isotherms, and they're great, they're beautiful, they're lovely, but they're very theoretical. In the real world, things get more complicated. So in the real world, sorption might take place by many different mechanisms, even in the same system, because again, soils and sediments are complicated places with they've got organic material, and they've got inorganic material, they got black carbon, they got old cell phones and pieces of shoes and tires and all kinds of crazy stuff. When Beth Ravit was doing some work in Kearney Marsh, which is a marsh right up against the New Jersey, I can't remember it's the Parkway or the Turnpike, but it's right up against the highway there in Kearney, New Jersey. And she was analyzing the material, and she decided that it was 1/3 soil, 1/3 roots, and 1/3 garbage. So, plastic, polyurethane, or all kinds of plastics, all kinds of crazy stuff can be in the soils and sediments and can be acting as a sorbent. So in the real world, you see a combination of isotherms. So you might see a linear isotherm with a Langmuir on top of it. That would be some adsorption with some absorption, right, at the same time. And one thing that you very often see is sorption to sediments that contain black carbon, which again, black carbon is a shorthand that we use for soot carbon, elemental carbon. Granular activated carbon is like a pure form of black carbon. And the sources of soot carbon in the urban environment, a couple of the really big sources are diesel exhaust from trucks. You see them blowing out that black smoke. That's a lot of diesel soot particles. And the other big source of black carbon, believe it or not, is brakes. The brakes on your car have those pads, and the brake pads are basically made of graphite, which is like pencil lead, and it's a little bit harder. But as it wears away, you get this brake dust, and the brake dust is mostly just elemental carbon. If you have a regenerative braking system, like I do on my plug-in Kia Niro, you don't get quite as much of that because your brakes last longer. So maybe as we shift to electric cars, all this black carbon is going to go away. Who knows? But I digress. The point is, sorption isotherms are complicated. So given that we understand that they're complicated, let's talk about how we do this. How do we use these concepts in the real world to talk about things like the fraction of a chemical in a system that is going to be in the dissolved phase? So we could call this F sub W, right? I probably shouldn't use the little f because it confuses you with fugacity. I should use a capital F, but whatever. Capital F. It's all good, right? We're all friends here. Okay, so we've seen a formulation like this before. CW times VW would be the mass of the chemical in the aqueous phase. CW times VW, this is the mass in the aqueous phase. CS times, and now this is the mass of solids, right? No longer the volume, but now the mass of solids. This would be the mass. Ooh, not well drawn, but the mass in the solid phase. So the bottom here is M total. I hate drawing with my mouse. It sucks. But anyway, so this is the total mass. Mass in the water divided by the total mass gives you the fraction of the mass that's in the aqueous phase. So the trick here that makes it a little bit different than some of these types of two-phase partitioning that we've done before is just that this is now the mass of solids, not the volume of solids. So we're going to use our master variable, which we're going to call KD. Again, KD is a big approximation, but let's just say we can use KD. We're going to do our magic trick of taking everything in this equation and dividing it through by CW, so that cancels, and this is now CS over CW, which is, yeah, you guessed it, that's now KD, right? So that's where this KD comes from. So V over VW plus KD times the mass of solids, and then we're going to do another trick and divide everything through by VW, so that this will cancel, and this will cancel, and this will become the mass of solids per volume of water. Aha, that makes some sense because we routinely measure the mass of solids per volume of water. We do things like total suspended solids, right? That would be our total suspended solids here. So we're going to call it, where'd it go? We're going to call it RSW, the ratio of solids to water, which again, you might think of as like total suspended solids. That's what we would measure. So the fraction in water is 1 over 1 plus the ratio of solids to water times KD. And of course, the fraction that's in the sorbed phase, Fs, would just be 1 minus Fw. Okay, so this equation might be useful to you. You might want to keep that one in mind. And then the question is, how do we express this ratio of solids to water? How do we express that solid-water ratio? Well, there's a couple different ways to do it. We could use porosity. If we're in it like an aquifer, we would maybe measure porosity, or we might measure bulk density, rho sub B, rho for density and B for bulk. The bulk density is the mass of solids per volume of the aquifer. Okay, and so it's the density of the solids times 1 minus phi, because phi is the volume of water per the total volume. So, yeah, so if this is phi, then 1 minus phi would be the volume of the solids per volume of water, and then to convert that to mass of solids, you'd have to multiply by the solid density. What is the solid density? Who knows? It varies, but if you don't know, a good guess is about 2.5 kilograms per liter. That's what the engineers use. They're always taking shortcuts. That's what they do. Okay, so we can rewrite phi here, porosity, and we can rewrite it this way. And based on this, we could back out the value for RSW, which we could then plug into that previous equation. So a couple of different ways to get the solid-water ratio. And now we'll do an example problem. So 1,4-dimethylbenzene has a KD, very, very conveniently has a KD of 1 liter per kilogram. So that makes the math nice and easy. So the fraction in a lake where we only have 1 milligram per liter solids. Now, here's one of the really key things that you will always forget, and I will always take off points for. KD has units of liters per kilogram. Liters per kilogram. Okay, and this is in milligrams per liter. If you want to multiply RSW by KD and get some dimensionless fraction, you got to convert these units to kilograms per liter. Don't forget to do it. I will take points off. Okay, so when you do that, you get 1 over 1 plus 10 to the minus 6 kilograms per liter times 1 liter per kilogram, and the units cancel out. So you get 1 over 1.00001, which is basically 1. So in a lake, almost all of the 1,4-dimethylbenzene is going to be dissolved. But in an aquifer, your ratio of solids to water is much higher, 10 kilograms per liter, because you've got a lot of solids and not a lot of liquid here in your aquifer. And so now your fraction in the dissolved phase is 1 over 1 plus 10 kilograms per liter times 1 liter per kilogram. Again, the units cancel, and you get 1 over 11, which is about 0.09, or 9%. And that, another way to think about that is that about 1 molecule in every 11 is dissolved. What does that mean to me? Well, it means only 1 out of every 11 molecules is able to move with the groundwater as the groundwater moves, because the rest are stuck on the aquifer and not going anywhere. And so you could, that can be a little bit confusing, because then you think of this one molecule going off into the clouds while the rest of them are stuck behind. But the better way to think about it is that each individual molecule of 1,4-dimethylbenzene spends 9%, 9% of its time in the dissolved phase, and 91% of its time in the sorbed phase. So 9% of the time it's moving with the groundwater, 91% of the time it's going nowhere. So if the groundwater is moving at, let's make the math easy, let's say the groundwater is moving 11 meters per year, then your chemical is only moving 1 meter per year. And that's what we call the retardation factor, RF, which is 1 over FW. So again, in this case, your retardation factor would be 1 over 0.09, or 11. And so your chemical is retarded by a factor of 11. The water moves, whatever it moves, 11 meters per day or per year. Your chemical only moves 1 meter per year. And here's a pictorial demonstration of that. Groundwater is flowing. You've always got a tree. I don't know, it's inexplicable. There's always a tree, but the tree never has leaves. I don't get it either. Okay, so here's your groundwater table. Your groundwater is flowing this direction. It has, this is the vector of your groundwater flow. It's pretty big, but the vector for the flow of your chemical is much lower. And notice that different chemicals have different values of KD. And so a chemical with a really high value of KD is going to be retarded more than a chemical with a low value of KD. So your aquifer becomes a giant chromatography column, where the more soluble components are moving relatively quickly, and the less soluble components aren't moving much at all, maybe not at all. And so what does that mean? That means if you have a leaking underground storage tank, and let's face it, all underground storage tanks will eventually leak. So let's say you're a gas station with a leaking underground storage tank, and you've got an ethanol blend of gasoline in your storage tank. The ethanol is very polar. It's going to move very quickly with the water and probably be gone, whereas the higher molecular weight stuff, the BTEX, the benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene in your gasoline are not going to move much at all. They're going to stick around for a long time and be a problem to you long after the ethanol is gone. And what is ethanol? Ethanol is a co-solvent. So ethanol is doing all kinds of crazy things to solubilize chemicals in the groundwater. It's a nightmare. I can't even begin to tell you. Okay. So, and then this is just a slide to frighten you, to remind you that in any given soil or sediment, you could have sorption to organic carbon going on, which we would describe thusly. We could have sorption to a mineral surface, so it depends on how much of this mineral surface and the surface area, not just the volume or the mass, but the surface area, because we're sorbing onto the surface. We could have ion exchange on the surface, that would be this. We could have covalently bonded absorption of the chemical, which would be this. So all kinds of crazy stuff is going on. Plus, some chemicals have acid-base chemistry, which we're going to talk about very soon. And that means that the chemical could be both in the neutral form and in the ionized form. So far in this class, we've been dealing with chemicals that don't have any acid-base chemistry, so you're all over here. But starting next week, when we start to do acid-base chemistry, you're going to start thinking about the charged form. So again, this is just to frighten you. Nobody actually uses an equation like this, or maybe a few crazy people do. But it's just to remind you that there's a lot of things going on, and that this whole treatment of using KD is, again, a vast oversimplification. And it works, it's good, but it's a big oversimplification. So again, this is just a picture of what I've said on this slide, showing the different mechanisms of sorption into organic matter, onto surfaces, covalent bonding, ion exchange, all the crazy stuff that can go on. Okay, so again, these are the sort of the terms that we would use if we want to describe sorption to organic carbon. We would need to know the fraction of organic carbon in our sediments. That's something that we do routinely measure. In many places, you would measure FOC in sediments and suspended sediments in an aquifer, and in all kinds of soils. You would measure FOC. If you're dealing with minerals, you got to measure surface area of minerals. Do you know how you measure surface area of minerals? Think about it. It's a Zen thing. How do you measure the surface area of a mineral? There's ways. I've done it. It's long. I won't go into it now, but there are ways to do it, but they're not easy. And then again, you could have some sort of surface exchange. That would mean that you have to kick something out in order to make space for your chemical. And so then there's competition, and God knows what happens then. And then here's reaction to specific sites. So then you need to know not only the surface area, but also how many sites are available per unit of surface area. So if your mind wasn't already ready to explode, let it freely now just ooze out of your ears. And this is where we're going to take a little break, and we'll come back and talk about sorption to particulate organic matter.